Moonlight filtered through the dirty windows of the old garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The man moved with practiced precision, his weathered hands checking each weapon before placing it carefully into the duffel bag. A Colt 1911, oiled and loaded. A hunting knife with a well-worn handle. Zip ties, duct tape. Each item had a purpose. Each purpose was grim. The burner phone on the workbench vibrated. The man's hand adorned with faded tattoos and scarred knuckles reached for it. His voice was gravel and whiskey when he answered. "Yeah, we found her." The voice on the other end was tense. "The woman you've been looking for these past 5 years." The man's eyes drifted to a photograph pinned to the wall, a beautiful woman with chestnut hair and a young girl with the same striking eyes. His jaw tightened as he ran a thumb over the worn edges of the photo. "Where Riverdale Elementary School. She's been hiding in plain sight." The man zipped the duffel bag closed. "Gather everyone. Tonight we end this." He hung up and stared at his reflection in the window glass. The face looking back belonged to a man who had seen too much darkness, who had fought too many battles. A man with nothing left to lose. Or so he thought. The morning air in Riverdale carried the crisp bite of autumn, that distinctive Montana chill that warned of the winter lurking just around the corner. Leaves in brilliant shades of amber and crimson drifted lazily from the old maple trees that lined Main Street. Against the backdrop of the towering Big Belt Mountains, the small town looked like something straight off a postcard, or perhaps more accurately, a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Murray's General Store had stood on the corner of Pine and Main since 1950, its wooden sign weathered but proud. Inside, the floorboards still creaked in the same spots they had when Eisenhower was president. Old Man Murray himself, now pushing 80, still rang up purchases on a cash register that predated electronic displays counting change back to customers the old-fashioned way. No barcodes here, just handwritten price tags and the occasional special discount for the locals he'd known for decades. Across the street, Ruby's Diner gleamed in chrome and red vinyl, its neon sign humming steadily since 1965. Inside, the jukebox still played 45 buys, offering everything from Johnny Cash to Elvis Presley for a quarter. The special was always the same on Wednesdays: meatloaf with mashed potatoes for $4.99. The recipe unchanged since Ruby's late husband had returned from Korea almost 40 years ago. Riverdale was the kind of town where people still knew their neighbors, where kids played outdoors until the streetlights came on, and where a handshake still meant something. The phone booth outside the post office had a phone book without missing pages. The town's single traffic light blinked yellow after 10 p.m. The local newspaper, the Riverdale Gazette, still reported on church picnics and high school football games with the same fervor as national events. Men wore Carhartt jackets and Levi's jeans not as a fashion statement, but because they lasted. Women pushed shopping carts with metal wheels through the aisles of the Piggly Wiggly, exchanging recipes and town gossip. Teenagers cruised Main Street in hand-me-down Chevy trucks and Ford Broncos, country music blaring from AM/FM radios, no CD players in sight. This was a town where digital watches were still considered somewhat novel, where cable TV was a luxury many homes didn't bother with, and where playing a video game meant a trip to the arcade at the bowling alley, not something you did in your living room. The internet was something most residents had vaguely heard about but never used. Cell phones were rare oddities, seen only when city folk passed through. It was here in this anachronistic haven that Samantha Blackwood had chosen to disappear. And it was here under the wide Montana sky that her past was finally catching up to her. Samantha Sam Blackwood stood at the chalkboard of Riverdale Elementary's third-grade classroom, her elegant handwriting flowing across the green surface. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Her chestnut hair was typically gathered in a practical ponytail, her wardrobe consisting mainly of modest button-up blouses and sensible slacks, nothing that would draw undue attention. Yet despite her efforts to blend in, there was something about Sam that caught the eye. Perhaps it was her posture, too straight, too aware. Maybe it was the way her gaze would occasionally sweep a room upon entering, as if cataloging exits and potential threats. Or it could have been how she sometimes paused in mid-sentence when a car backfired, outside her body momentarily tensing before she forced a smile and continued with her lesson. Sam had arrived in Riverdale 18 months ago, taking over the third-grade position after Mrs. Henderson's retirement. The school principal had been thrilled to find someone with her qualifications willing to work in their small town. Her references were impeccable, her teaching credentials from the University of Michigan legitimate. No one questioned why someone so obviously intelligent and capable would choose tiny Riverdale over the opportunities of larger districts. "Who can tell me the capital of Montana?" Sam asked, turning to face her class of 22 eight-year-olds. Several hands shot up. Sam smiled at Emma, her daughter, but called on Michael Reed instead. "Helena," Michael answered, confidently pushing his glasses up his nose. "That's correct, Michael. Excellent." Sam moved around her desk with an economy of motion that spoke of athletic training. "Now, who can tell me something interesting about Helena?" As the children volunteered facts they'd learned, Sam's mind momentarily drifted to the morning's routine. The careful check of locks before bed, the small alarm system she'd installed herself, the .38 revolver secured in the hidden compartment behind the bathroom mirror. Necessary precautions. Always necessary. Sam lived with Emma in a modest two-bedroom house on the eastern edge of town, a place chosen specifically for its clear sight lines and multiple exit routes. The neighbors found her friendly but private. She attended parent-teacher conferences and town meetings, but volunteered for little else. She declined invitations to join the church choir or the ladies' bowling league with polite excuses about needing to spend time with her daughter. What the good people of Riverdale didn't know, what they could never know, was that 5 years ago, Samantha Blackwood had been Special Agent Samantha Brennan of the FBI's Organized Crime Division. Her specialty, infiltrating and gathering evidence against outlaw motorcycle gangs involved in weapons trafficking and drug distribution. The memory crashed into her consciousness like a sudden thunderclap. The fluorescent lights of the field office buzzed overhead as Sam buttoned her standard-issue FBI blazer, checking her sidearm one last time before the briefing. The wall behind Assistant Director Wallace was covered with surveillance photos. Bearded men in leather cuts covered with patches, Harleys gleaming in the sun, clandestine exchanges in bar parking lots. "The Los Diablos are moving product through 3 states now," Wallace said, tapping the map. "Your undercover work with the informant has given us the break we needed. We move tonight." Her husband David, also an agent, squeezed her hand under the table. "Be careful out there," he whispered. "I've got reservations for our anniversary tomorrow. Don't be late." She'd smiled at him, confident in their training and their team. Wouldn't dream of it. She couldn't have known it would be the last time she'd see him alive. The school bell jolted Sam back to the present. She blinked away the memory, forcing her features into the pleasant mask of Miss Blackwood, third-grade teacher. "Remember to read Chapter 5 for tomorrow," she called, as the children gathered their things for recess. "And don't forget your permission slips for the museum field trip." As the children filed out, Sam's eyes lingered on Emma, her miracle, her reason for everything. Emma with David's eyes and smile, mercifully unaware of the truth. Emma who believed her father had been a government employee who died in a car accident. Emma who had no idea that her mother checked the locks 3 times every night because the men who killed her father might still be looking for them. Sam had been given a new identity through the FBI's emergency relocation program after the ambush that claimed David's life. The operation had gone catastrophically wrong. Their cover blown somehow, their team ambushed. David had died, saving her, pushing her out of the line of fire. 3 agents lost, 2 Los Diablos members killed, and their leadership had escaped prosecution. She testified wearing a hood her identity concealed, then disappeared into the program with Emma. New name, new history, new life in a town too small and insignificant for anyone to look twice at. But Sam knew better than most that no matter how carefully you disappeared, there was always a trail. Always something that could lead the predators to your door if they were determined enough. And the Los Diablos were nothing if not determined. So she taught multiplication tables in state capitals by day, and by night she maintained her training regimen in her basement, keeping her shooting skills sharp, her reflexes honed, her body ready. Just in case. Always just in case. Emma Blackwood sat cross-legged under the big oak tree at the edge of the playground, her lunchbox open beside her. At 8 years old, she had her mother's delicate features, but her father's curious nature and determined jawline. Though she had no way of knowing the latter. Her chestnut hair was pulled into 2 neat braids, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with intelligence beyond her years. Unlike many third-graders who gravitated toward games of tag or kickball during recess, Emma preferred to sketch in her notebook or read. Today she was carefully drawing the mountain range visible in the distance, her small hand moving with surprising precision across the paper. "That looks really good," said a voice above her. Emma looked up to see Michael Reed standing there, his glasses slightly askew, as usual, a peanut butter sandwich clutched in one hand. "Thanks," she smiled, scooting over to make room for him under the tree. "You can sit if you want." Michael plopped down beside her, his lanky frame folding awkwardly. At 8, he was already tall for his age with a mop of dark hair that never seemed to stay combed no matter how much his father tried. "Is that the Big Belt Mountains?" "Yep, I'm gonna give it to my mom for her desk." "That's cool. My dad has all my drawings on the refrigerator at home and in his office at the garage." The two fell into comfortable silence, the kind only possible between children who accept each other without question. They'd become friends almost immediately when Michael had transferred to Riverdale Elementary 6 months ago. Both were quieter than their peers, both loved books, and both lived with single parents, a bond that needed no explanation between them. "Are you going to the museum on the field trip?" Imama asked between bites of her apple. "Yeah, Dad already signed my permission slip. He said the motorcycle exhibit is supposed to be really cool." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Mom said they have dinosaur bones too, real ones." She glanced across the playground, where Ms. Wilson, the new fourth-grade teacher, was monitoring recess duty. Something about the way the woman was watching her made Emma uncomfortable, though she couldn't have explained why. Adults were often hard to understand. "I don't like Ms. Wilson," Michael said suddenly, following Emma's gaze. "She looks at people funny." "Mom says we shouldn't judge people before we know them," Emma replied automatically, though privately she agreed. There was something in Ms. Wilson's eyes that reminded Emma of the look stray dogs got sometimes, hungry and mean. Emma returned to her drawing, adding careful details to the mountain ridges. She never talked about it, but sometimes she dreamed about a man with a laugh like thunder and hands that would toss her high in the air. In the dreams, he called her "my little eagle" and promised to teach her to fly. Mom said her father had been kind and brave, that he'd loved them very much, that he'd worked for the government and died in an accident when Emma was 3. There were only 2 photos of him in their house, one on Mom's bedside table and one in the living room. Sometimes Emma would stare at them, trying to pull more memories from the depths of her mind, but they remained frustratingly out of reach. "Do you remember your mom?" Emma asked suddenly. Michael looked surprised by the question, then shook his head. "Not really. Dad says she died when I was really little. Cancer." "Do you miss her even though you don't remember her?" Michael considered this with the serious contemplation only children can give to profound questions. "Yeah, sometimes, especially when Dad gets that sad look." "You know," Emma nodded. She knew exactly the look he meant. Her mother got it too, usually when she thought Emma wasn't watching. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. As they gathered their things, Emma impulsively asked, "Do you want to come over sometime? Mom makes really good cookies on Saturdays." Michael's face lit up. "I'll ask my dad. Maybe you could come see the garage too. He's building this really cool motorcycle right now. It's got flames painted on it and everything." As they walked back to class, Emma felt a small surge of excitement. She'd never had a friend over before. Mom was always so cautious about visitors. But surely Michael would be okay. After all, his dad seemed nice the one time she'd seen him waiting in his big black truck to pick Michael up from school. What Emma couldn't possibly know was that her innocent friendship was about to connect 2 worlds that had every reason to remain apart, and set in motion events that would shatter the careful peace her mother had constructed around them. The distinctive rumble of a Harley-Davidson engine echoed through Reed's custom motorcycles as Jackson Reed made final adjustments to the carburetor. His large hands scarred and calloused from years of mechanical work, and harder things moved with surprising gentleness over the machine parts. At 45, Jackson cut an imposing figure, 6'2" with broad shoulders and the solid build of a man who had spent his life doing physical work. His dark hair, now salted with gray at the temples, was pulled back in a short ponytail, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that had seen its share of both sun and trouble. The garage was his sanctuary and his business, a large metal building at the edge of town with 3 service bays, a small office, and a custom fabrication shop in the back. The concrete floors were meticulously cleaned tools, organized with military precision. On the walls hung vintage motorcycle signs, old license plates from across the country, and framed photographs of classic bikes. The air smelled of oil metal and leather, the elements of Jackson's world. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a red shop rag tucked into his back pocket. His everyday uniform rarely varied: worn jeans, heavy boots, plain t-shirt under an open flannel shirt, and when he went riding, the leather cut that hung on the coat rack in his office, the one bearing the patches that identified him to those who knew what to look for. "Looking good, boss." Ray, his assistant manager, whistled appreciatively at the restored vintage shovelhead. "Customer's gonna flip when he sees this." Jackson nodded, allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. "Tell him he can pick it up tomorrow. I want to take it for one final test ride this evening." Ray, a lean man in his 30s with a shaved head and sleeve tattoos, nodded. "Will do." "You picking up Michael from school today?" "Yeah, I got a call from his teacher. Wants to talk about some field trip." Jackson glanced at the old clock on the wall. "Should head out in about an hour." As Ray returned to the front of the shop, Jackson moved to his small office and closed the door. He sat heavily in the creaking desk chair and opened the bottom drawer, removing a leather-bound ledger. This was the real business: the books that tracked the Montana Charter's legitimate income and the other revenue streams, the numbers that would never be shared with the IRS. Jackson Reed had been president of the Montana chapter of the Hells Angels for 7 years now. His father before him had worn the patch, and Jackson had grown up in the life. He'd earned his way through the ranks, first as a hang-around, then prospect full-member sergeant, at arms vice president, and finally president when Old Man Callahan had stepped down. Under his leadership, the Montana chapter had moved away from drug trafficking and toward more sustainable businesses, protection, some loan operations, legitimate custom motorcycle work, and investment in local businesses that needed cash injections without bank questions. It wasn't entirely clean, but it was cleaner than most chapters, and Jackson intended to keep it that way. His eyes drifted to the photo on his desk. Michael at 6, sitting proudly on a miniature electric Harley that Jackson had built for him. Beside it, a faded photograph of Sarah, his late wife, her beautiful face already gaunt from the cancer that would take her 2 years later. Jackson's mind drifted back to that hospital room, the antiseptic smell, the quiet beeping of machines. "Promise me something," Sarah had whispered, her once vibrant voice now thin as paper. "Promise me he'll have a chance at something different." Jackson had held her frail hand, his heart breaking. "What do you mean, the life, Jay, the club?" Her eyes still startlingly bright despite everything fixed on his. "I never asked you to leave it. I knew who you were when I fell in love with you. But Michael, he should get to choose. Promise me you'll give him that choice." He'd nodded, throat too tight for words. "I promise. And promise me you'll try to find some peace." Her fingers had tightened weakly around his. "The anger, the revenge, it's eating you alive. Let it go for Michael's sake, if not your own." The memory faded as Jackson closed the ledger. He'd kept his first promise to Sarah. Michael knew nothing about his real position in the club. To his son, the men who sometimes gathered at their house for barbecues were just Dad's motorcycle friends. The garage employees who bore tattoos and cuts were just enthusiasts. Jackson was careful to shield Michael from that part of his life, planning to give him the choice Sarah had wanted when he was old enough to understand. The second promise had been harder. The anger had been Jackson's companion for so long. Anger at the world that had taken Sarah, anger at the rival clubs that threatened his territory, anger at the system that had never given him a fair shot. But for Michael's sake, he'd been trying. Moving to Riverdale had been part of that effort. A small town away from the larger chapter politics in Billings and Missoula. A place where Michael could go to a decent school where they could have something like a normal life. The club members understood. They respected family commitments above almost anything else. They were still loyal to him, still answered his calls, still followed his lead. But here in this small town, he could be just Jackson Reed, motorcycle mechanic and single dad most of the time. Jackson checked his watch and grabbed his keys from the desk. He never wore his cut to pick up Michael from school, another boundary he maintained carefully. Instead, he shrugged into a worn leather jacket without patches or insignia. To the outside world, he was just another working dad picking up his kid. As he walked through the garage toward his black Ford F-150, Jackson had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed separation between his two lives was about to collapse, or that the catalyst would be his son's friendship with a quiet girl who drew mountains whose mother had secrets as dangerous as his own. Patricia Wilson applied another coat of red lipstick, examining her reflection in the teacher's lounge mirror with critical precision. At 40, she maintained the kind of polished appearance that required considerable effort. Her blonde hair highlighted and styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawlessly applied, her clothing expensive and fashionable. Too fashionable, really, for a fourth-grade teacher in a small Montana town. But Patricia had never believed in lowering one's standards just because of geography. She blotted her lips and returned the lipstick to her designer purse, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 3 weeks at Riverdale Elementary, and already she'd begun to establish her position. The principal, that spineless man Roberts, practically fell over himself to accommodate her suggestions. Most of the other teachers, lonely middle-aged women starved for excitement, eagerly included her in their pathetic lunch groups and gossip sessions. The children feared her, which was exactly as it should be. Only Samantha Blackwood remained aloof, politely resistant to Patricia's overtures of professional camaraderie. There was something about that woman that nagged at Patricia like a splinter under the skin, something familiar that she couldn't quite place. "Getting ready for parents' night?" asked Ellen Crowley, the overweight fifth-grade teacher who seemed to survive exclusively on diet soda and stale donuts from the teacher's lounge. Patricia forced a smile. "Just freshening up before afternoon classes." "You always look so put together," Ellen said wistfully. "I don't know how you manage it." "Discipline," Patricia replied, closing her purse with a decisive snap. "In all things." She left the teacher's lounge and walked down the hallway, heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. Children pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, their instincts correctly identifying a predator. Patricia enjoyed their fear. It made classroom management so much simpler. Passing Samantha Blackwood's classroom, Patricia paused, observing through the small window in the door. The woman was helping a student with a math problem, bent slightly at the waist, her expression patient. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she studied Samantha's profile, the nagging sense of recognition growing stronger. The bell rang and Patricia continued to her own classroom, her mind working through possibilities. She'd moved to Riverdale with a very specific purpose, one that had nothing to do with shaping young minds. Finding employment at the elementary school had been a means to an end, a respectable cover that gave her access to the community while she carried out her real mission. Her brother Diego, known in certain circles as El Cuchillo, the knife, had been explicit in his instructions: establish yourself in Riverdale, monitor all newcomers to the area, and report anything suspicious. The Los Diablos Motorcycle Club had reason to believe that someone with valuable information about their operations had fled to this region of Montana, someone who could identify Diego in connection with certain unfortunate events 5 years ago. Patricia's classroom was empty when she entered, the children still making their way back from lunch. She took the opportunity to check her burner phone hidden in a false bottom of her desk drawer. No messages. Diego grew impatient, but these things took time. Small towns were suspicious of outsiders. One had to establish trust before asking questions. The students began to file in, and Patricia composed her features into the stern mask of authority she wore like armor. As the children settled into their seats, her gaze fell on Emma Blackwood, who had stopped to help Michael Reed pick up a dropped pencil case. Patricia had noticed the friendship between the two children and found it potentially useful. The Reed boys' father was something of a mystery, a newcomer like the Blackwoods, though he'd arrived a year after them. He owned the motorcycle shop at the edge of town and kept to himself. There were rumors, of course. Small towns ran on rumors. Some said he'd been in prison. Others whispered he had connections to motorcycle gangs. Patricia intended to find out the truth, and Michael might prove useful in that regard. But it was Emma who truly interested her. The girl was well-behaved but watchful in a way that most children weren't, almost hyper-aware of her surroundings. And there was something about her features, something in the set of her jaw and the shape of her eyes that tugged at Patricia's memory. "Emma," Patricia called, her voice honey over steel, "please distribute these workbooks." The girl approached the desk cautiously, and Patricia studied her more closely. Yes, there was definitely something familiar about her. Perhaps the mother wasn't the one Diego was looking for at all. Perhaps it was the child who was the key. "Thank you, dear," Patricia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How is your mother these days? Still enjoying teaching third grade?" "Yes, Ms. Wilson," Emma replied politely, though Patricia noted how the child avoided direct eye contact. You know, you look so much like someone I used to know, Patricia mused, watching for a reaction. Has anyone ever told you that a flicker of something, uncertainty, worry, crossed the girl's face? No, ma'am. Must be my imagination. Patricia waved her away. Go ahead and pass those out now. As Emma moved between the desks, Patricia mentally added another item to her growing list of observations about the Blackwoods. There were too many small inconsistencies accumulating. Samantha's excessive privacy, her reluctance to discuss her past, her physical fitness that seemed beyond what a school teacher would maintain, the watchfulness in both mother and daughter. Patricia had learned patience from her brother. The Los Diablos didn't rush into situations without gathering all available intelligence. She would continue to observe, to probe gently to build her case. And when she had enough to take to Diego, he would reward her handsomely. He always did when she served the family interests. After all, blood was thicker than water, and the Vasquez family had spilled plenty of both. The autumn wind carried a bitter chill as Samantha Blackwood locked the classroom door behind her. Most of the teachers and students had already left for the day, the parking lot nearly empty, except for a few remaining cars. Among them, Sam noted a sleek silver Audi that seemed wildly out of place in Riverdale, Patricia Wilson's car. Sam had developed an almost visceral dislike for the new fourth-grade teacher, though she couldn't entirely articulate why. Professional jealousy wasn't in her nature, and she generally gave new colleagues the benefit of the doubt. But something about Patricia Wilson set off the internal alarm system Sam had honed through years of FBI work. The woman asked too many questions about backgrounds and histories. She watched people with calculating eyes that missed nothing. She cultivated allies and isolated targets with the precision of a psychological operative. In short, Patricia Wilson behaved like someone with an agenda. Sam crossed the parking lot to her modest Honda Civic, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. As she reached for her car door, she noticed Patricia emerge from the school building, engaged in an intense phone conversation. The woman hadn't noticed Sam yet, partially concealed as she was behind a larger SUV. Professional instinct made Sam pause, her hand on the door handle, her body still. Patricia's voice carried in the clear mountain air. Taking longer than expected, she was saying, her tone deferential in a way Sam had never heard from her before. No, I haven't confirmed it yet, but there are similarities. Yes, I know how important this is to you. Patricia paused, listening to the person on the other end. Her face hardened. Los Diablos doesn't need to send anyone else. I can handle this. Another pause. Fine. I'll call when I have something concrete. The name hit Sam like a physical blow. Los Diablos. The motorcycle gang that had ambushed their FBI operation. The people who had murdered David. Here in this tiny town in the middle of nowhere, the past she'd been running from for 5 years had somehow found her. Sam ducked into her car before Patricia could spot her, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had they tracked her somehow? Was Patricia Wilson actually connected to Los Diablos? Or was this some horrible coincidence? And most importantly, was Emma in danger? She started the car with trembling hands and pulled out of the parking lot, forcing herself to drive at a normal speed, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She needed to think, to plan. The emergency relocation protocols were still in place. She could activate them with one phone call, be gone within hours with new identities, new lives. But running meant uprooting Emma again, meant leaving behind the tenuous stability they'd built. Sam took a different route home than usual, watching her rearview mirror carefully for any sign of being followed. Her mind flashed back to her FBI training. When in doubt, go to ground, assess the threat, then decide whether to engage or evade. She needed more information before making a decision that would change their lives again. Arriving home, Sam found Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, who watched Emma after school knitting in the living room, while Emma worked on homework at the dining table. There's my favorite teacher. Mrs. Henderson smiled, gathering her knitting supplies. Emma's been telling me all about the museum field trip. Sounds exciting. Sam forced a smile, her nerves still jangling. Thanks for watching, Her Grace. Same time tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it. This one keeps me young. The older woman patted Emma's head affectionately as she passed. Once Mrs. Henderson had left, Sam engaged all the locks, then moved through their small house, checking windows and blind spots with practiced efficiency. Emma watched her curiously. Mom, is everything okay? Sam turned, making an effort to soften her expression. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just thought I heard something outside. She approached the table looking over Emma's math worksheet. How's the homework coming? Almost done. Michael helped me understand the fractions part at recess. That was nice of him. Sam hesitated, then asked casually, how are things with Ms. Wilson? Is she still being strict with your class? Emma's face clouded slightly. She's weird, Mom. She asked me today if anyone ever told me I look like someone she knows. A cold finger of dread traced Sam's spine. What did you say? I said no, was that right? Yes, honey, that was exactly right. Sam brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead, her protective instincts roaring. Listen, there's something I need to take care of in the basement. Can you finish your homework and then maybe read for a bit? Emma nodded, accustomed to her mother's occasional need for privacy. The basement was off limits by long-standing rule. Sam's explanation that her exercise equipment and grown-up things were stored there had always been enough. In reality, the basement housed Sam's emergency supplies and equipment, a secure gun safe, a ham radio, a small stockpile of cash, an emergency identification, and a dedicated landline that couldn't be traced to their home address. It was where she maintained her skills, where she kept the parts of herself that Samantha Blackwood, elementary school teacher, had no reason to possess. Sam dialed a number from memory, her fingers steadied now that she was taking action. After several rings, a gruff voice answered, Williamson Lock and Key. I need to speak to the manager about my safety deposit box, Sam said, reciting the code phrase that would identify her to the FBI handler assigned to her case. One moment. There was a series of clicks, then a new voice came on the line. This is Marshall. It's been a while. The box may have been compromised, Sam said without preamble. I need a background check on a Patricia Wilson currently employed at Riverdale Elementary in Montana. Approximately 40 years old, blonde, drives a silver Audi A6, arrived in town about 3 weeks ago. That's not standard protocol for your situation, the handler replied cautiously. I heard her mention Los Diablos on a phone call. Specifically, she said, Los Diablos doesn't need to send anyone else. A long silence followed. That changes things. I'll have something for you within 24 hours. Same drop point. Yes, and Marshall, I need to know if we should run. Understood. Stay vigilant, but don't do anything to attract attention. I'll expedite this. Sam hung up, leaning against the cold concrete wall. 5 years of looking over her shoulder, 5 years of jumping at shadows, and now it seemed her fears had been justified all along. They had found her. Somehow they had found her. Upstairs, she could hear Emma humming softly as she worked, the same lullaby Sam sang to her at bedtime. The sound steeled her resolve. She wouldn't run, not yet. First, she would gather intelligence, confirm the threat, and only then decide on the best course of action to keep her daughter safe. What Sam couldn't possibly know was that Patricia Wilson wasn't the only person in Riverdale with dangerous secrets, or that the man whose son had befriended her daughter carried as many shadows as she did. Jackson Reed guided his black Ford F-150 into a parking space outside Riverdale Elementary, cutting the engine with practiced precision. He was a few minutes early for his appointment with Michael's teacher, but punctuality had been drilled into him by his father and reinforced by his time in the Army. Besides, being early gave him a chance to observe the surroundings, an old habit he'd never quite shaken. The school building was typical small-town America. Red brick 2 stories with a flagpole out front and children's artwork visible through the windows. Most of the parking lot had emptied, though a few cars remained. Jackson noted them automatically. A Honda Civic, a silver Audi that looked expensive for a teacher's salary, a few older models that had seen better days. He checked his appearance in the rearview mirror, ensuring he looked like what he was supposed to be, a respectable single father concerned about his son's education. He'd left his leather jacket in the truck, wearing instead a flannel shirt over a plain black t-shirt, jeans, and boots. His hair was neatly tied back, his beard trimmed. The only visible tattoos were on his hands and the edge of one that peaked above his collar. Nothing that would raise eyebrows in rural Montana. Inside the school, the hallway smelled of floor wax and school lunch, a combination that brought back memories of his own childhood. Not all of them pleasant. He followed the signs to room 108, where Ms. Blackwood had asked to meet him regarding the upcoming field trip. Michael had mentioned his teacher several times, always positively, but Jackson had never met the woman. The parent-teacher conferences earlier in the year had been handled by Ray's wife, Donna, who sometimes helped out with Michael when Jackson had club business. He knocked on the partially open door and stepped into the classroom. The woman at the desk looked up, and Jackson felt a moment of unexpected recognition, though he was certain they'd never met. She had the kind of face you remembered, striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with intelligent eyes and a composed expression that gave little away. "Mr. Reed," she stood, extending her hand. "I'm Samantha Blackwood, Michael's teacher. Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, not the limp-fingered greeting many women offered, but not trying to prove anything either. Just confident, professional. "Please call me Jackson." He took the adult-sized chair she indicated beside her desk, feeling slightly oversized in the elementary school furniture. "Is everything okay with Michael? He seems to be enjoying your class." "Michael's doing very well," she assured him, sitting back down and folding her hands on the desk. "He's bright, engaged, and one of my most thoughtful students. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the museum field trip next week. As you know, we're visiting the Montana Historical Society in Helena." She pushed a permission slip across the desk toward him. "Michael mentioned you hadn't signed his form yet, and I wanted to make sure he doesn't miss out. He's particularly excited about the motorcycle exhibit they currently have on display." Jackson nodded, taking the form. "I've been meaning to sign it, just been busy at the shop." He studied her as he reached for a pen. There was something in her posture, a readiness and awareness, that seemed out of place for a school teacher. It reminded him of guys he'd known in the service or certain law enforcement types he'd encountered over the years. "He also mentioned that your daughter Emma and he have become friends." Jackson continued signing the form with his neat, angular handwriting. "Says she's quite the artist." Something warmed in her expression at the mention of her daughter. "She is. She loves to draw, especially landscapes. Michael talks about her quite a bit. Seems they've hit it off, Mr." Blackwood nodded, a slight hesitation visible before she spoke. "Emma mentioned she invited Michael over sometime. I wanted to check if that would be okay with you." "Of course," Jackson said, surprised by her formality. "Michael doesn't have many close friends here yet. It would be good for him." "Wonderful. Perhaps this weekend, Saturday afternoon. Emma mentioned you run the motorcycle shop at the edge of town. I know weekends can be busy for business owners." There it was again, that slight caution in her manner, the careful way she phrased things. Jackson had developed a finely tuned radar for people hiding something. This woman, Samantha Blackwood, was definitely holding her cards close. "Saturday works. I'm closed Sundays, but Saturdays we're open till 4. He handed back the signed permission slip. "Michael would love it, and he's been wanting to invite Emma to see the shop sometime too. I'm restoring a 1948 Indian chief that he thinks is pretty impressive." Emma mentioned that. She smiled, and it transformed her face, softening the watchful quality he'd noticed. She's never shown much interest in mechanics before, but apparently Michael's enthusiasm is contagious. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A blonde woman in an expensive-looking outfit stalled in the doorway, her gaze moving assessingly between Jackson and Ms. Blackwood. "Sorry to interrupt, Samantha. I just needed to borrow the third-grade curriculum guide when you're done." Her eyes lingered on Jackson with undisguised interest. "Of course, Patricia. This is Jackson Reed, Michael's father. Mr. Reed, this is Patricia Wilson, our new fourth-grade teacher." Jackson nodded politely but didn't stand. Something about the woman raised his hackles immediately, a predatory quality in her eyes that he recognized all too well. "The motorcycle shop owner," Patricia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I've heard so much about your custom work. Perhaps I'll have to stop by sometime." "We're pretty specialized," Jackson replied, his tone neutral but firm. "Unless you ride American-made bikes, we might not be much help." Patricia's smile tightened slightly. "You never know. I'm always interested in local craftsmanship." She turned back to Ms. Blackwood. "I'll come back later for that guide." After she left, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Jackson could sense Ms. Blackwood's tension, though she hid it well. "Not a fan?" he asked, nodding toward the door where Patricia had been. A guarded look crossed Ms. Blackwood's face. "We have different teaching philosophies." Jackson recognized a diplomatic non-answer when he heard one, but didn't press. "Michael mentioned she's been hard on some of the kids, including your daughter." Something flashed in her eyes, a protective fierceness that Jackson understood completely. Has Michael said something specific? Just that Ms. Wilson seems to pick on certain kids. Emma being one of them. Jackson shrugged. Kids notice that kind of thing. Ms. Blackwood wrote something on a post-it note and slid it across the desk. This is our address. Saturday at 2 o'clock would be perfect if that works for you. Emma's looking forward to it. Jackson pocketed the note and stood. We'll be there. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for looking out for Michael. Moving here hasn't been easy for him. Children are resilient, she replied, standing as well, more than we give them credit for. As Jackson walked back to his truck, he found himself puzzling over Samantha Blackwood. On the surface, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a dedicated teacher and mother. But his instincts, honed through years in environments where misreading people could be fatal, told him there was more to her story. And Jackson Reed had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Meanwhile, from her classroom window, Sam watched Jackson Reed climb into his truck. The man moved with the confident economy of someone trained in physical confrontation, military perhaps, or something less official. His forearms, visible when he had rolled up his sleeves slightly, bore tattoos that looked like more than casual body art. And when Patricia had entered the room, his posture had shifted subtly into something more defensive, more alert. Michael Reed's father was not just a small-town mechanic. Of that, Sam was certain. And in her experience, people with secrets were either potential allies or potential threats. She just wasn't sure yet which category Jackson Reed fell into. What neither of them realized was that their carefully compartmentalized worlds were about to collide, and that the catalyst would be a children's playdate and a teacher with dangerous connections. The Riverdale Elementary Fall Harvest Festival had been a tradition for as long as anyone in town could remember. Every October, the school transformed its playground and gymnasium into a celebration of autumn, complete with hay bale mazes, apple-bobbing pumpkin carving contests, and homemade pies that could make a grown man weep. For the children, it was a highlight of the school year. For the adults, it was a cherished reminder of simpler times. This year, however, the festival carried an undercurrent of tension that few could identify but many could feel. The sky above hung heavy with dark clouds promising the season's first serious cold front. The wind had picked up since morning, carrying the bitter bite of approaching winter, rustling the orange and yellow decorations that adorned the school grounds. Emma Blackwood stood with her classmates near the edge of the playground, shifting from foot to keep warm. She wore her favorite red wool sweater, the one Mom had knitted last winter, over jeans and sturdy boots. Her breath formed small clouds in the chilly air as she waited for Ms. Wilson to explain the outdoor activities she'd organized for the 3rd and 4th grade classes. I don't like this, Michael whispered beside her, his glasses slightly fogged from his breath in the cold. My dad says it's going to snow later. We shouldn't be outside. Emma nodded in agreement. Most of the festival activities had been moved indoors due to the weather forecast, but for some reason Miss Wilson had insisted that her special games would take place outside. The principal had reluctantly agreed, though he'd limited the outdoor time to 30 minutes. Patricia Wilson strode across the playground toward them, a clipboard clutched in her manicured hands, her expensive wool coat impeccably tailored. Unlike the other teachers who wore casual clothes and comfortable shoes for the festival, Ms. Wilson looked as if she were attending a business meeting, high heels sinking slightly into the soft ground with each step. Gather around, children, she called, her voice carrying on the wind. Today we're going to have a special competition between our classes, a series of challenges that will test your teamwork and determination. The students huddled closer together, some already shivering in the unseasonable cold. Emma glanced toward the school building, hoping to spot her mother, but Ms. Blackwood's class was helping set up the indoor crafts section and wouldn't be out for another 20 minutes. Our first game, Ms. Wilson announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, is what I'd call Drench the Defender. She gestured to a series of buckets filled with water that her teaching aide had arranged in a line. Beside each bucket sat a large sponge. Each team will select one defender. The other team members will take turns soaking their sponges and trying to hit the defender with water. The defender can dodge but must stay within the marked circle. The team whose defender stays driest after everyone has had a turn wins a special prize. A murmur of concern rippled through the children. The temperature couldn't have been more than 40 degrees and the wind made it feel even colder. Ms. Wilson, One of the braver fourth graders raised his hand. Isn't it too cold for water games? Patricia's smile tightened. The cold is part of the challenge, Thomas. In life, we don't always get to choose our conditions. We must adapt and overcome. She swept her gaze across the students. Now each class needs to choose their defender. Before anyone could volunteer, Patricia's eyes locked onto Emma. I think Emma should be the defender for the third grade team. She's so resilient, isn't she? Emma felt her stomach tighten. She didn't want to be the defender. She didn't want cold water thrown at her in this weather. But all eyes had turned to her, and she didn't know how to refuse a teacher's suggestion. I'll do it, Michael suddenly spoke up, stepping forward. I want to be the defender. Patricia's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing back into its practiced pleasantness. That's very gallant of you, Michael. But I think Emma would be perfect for this role. Don't you want your friend to have a chance to shine? Michael opened his mouth to protest again, but Emma placed a hand on his arm. It's okay, she whispered, though her insides churned with anxiety. She didn't understand why Ms. Wilson always seemed to single her out, but she'd been raised not to challenge adults in public. Excellent, Patricia said, marking something on her clipboard. Emma will defend for the third graders, and Jason will defend for the fourth grade team. Jason, a stocky boy known for his athletic abilities, looked pleased with the selection. Emma tried to swallow her growing apprehension as she followed Ms. Wilson to the marked circle on the cold ground. What no one noticed was Michael quietly slipping away toward the school building, a determined look on his young face. Inside the warm gymnasium, Sam Blackwood was arranging construction paper and safety scissors at the craft tables when Michael Reed burst through the double doors, slightly out of breath, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Ms. Blackwood, he called, weaving between tables to reach her. You need to come outside. Sam immediately tensed her hand, instinctively moving to her side where her service weapon would have been in her FBI days. What's wrong, Michael's Emma, okay? Ms. Wilson is making Emma play a water game outside, Michael explained quickly. Everyone has to throw wet sponges at her and it's freezing out there. Sam's expression darkened. Where are they doing this? On the playground. Ms. Wilson says it's some kind of teamwork exercise, but Michael hesitated, then added quietly, I think she's just being mean to Emma again. Without another word, Sam strode toward the doors, Michael hurrying to keep up with her long strides. As they passed the principal's office, Sam called out, Mr. Roberts, you might want to come see what's happening on the playground. By the time Sam pushed through the exterior doors, the game was already underway. Through the small crowd of students, she could see Emma standing in a chalk circle, her red sweater already splashed with dark, wet patches, her face a stoic mask as another child prepared to throw a soaking sponge. Stop this right now, Sam's voice cut through the playground chatter like a knife. The children froze, the fourth grader, with the sponge lowering his arm uncertainly. Patricia Wilson turned slowly, her expression briefly revealing annoyance before settling into professional concern. Samantha, is something wrong? She asked coolly. Sam pushed through the circle of children to reach her daughter. Emma was visibly shivering, her sweater and jeans soaked in several places, her hair damp and clinging to her forehead. What were you thinking? Sam demanded, shrugging off her cardigan and wrapping it around Emma's shoulders. It's nearly freezing out here. Patricia straightened, clutching her clipboard like a shield. We're simply having a fall festival game. The children are having fun, and it builds character. Building character. Sam's voice was dangerously quiet as she pulled Emma close to her side. My daughter is soaking wet in 40-degree weather. This isn't building character. It's reckless. The children were eager participants, Patricia argued, though the students around them had grown uncomfortably silent, sensing the tension between the adults. Principal Roberts arrived, taking in the scene with confusion. What's happening here, teachers? Ms. Wilson organized a water game in freezing weather. Sam explained, her professional demeanor barely containing her anger. Emma is soaked and freezing. This is completely inappropriate. Roberts looked from Sam to Patricia, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Ms. Wilson, I believe we agreed that outdoor activities would be limited due to the weather forecast. This was a brief exercise in teamwork, Patricia insisted, her smile fixed firmly in place. Perhaps some parents are simply more protective than others. Sam's eyes flashed dangerously, but before she could respond, a small voice interrupted. I got it all on video, Ms. Blackwood. All eyes turned to Michael, who held up a bulky camcorder, the kind that recorded onto VHS tapes. The red recording light was still blinking. My dad got this for my birthday, Michael explained proudly. He lets me borrow it sometimes for special events. I was recording the festival for him. Patricia's face paled slightly. That's school property you're filming without permission. I'm afraid I'll have to confiscate that tape. Actually, Principal Roberts interjected, finding his backbone in the face of potential liability. I'd like to see that recording, young man. And Ms. Wilson, I think we need to have a discussion in my office. As the principal led a stiff-backed Patricia toward the building, Sam knelt in front of Emma, checking her temperature with the back of her hand against her forehead. Are you okay, sweetie? How do you feel? Emma tried to smile bravely, but her teeth were chattering. I'm just cold, Mom. Sam hugged her tightly, then looked up at Michael. Thank you for coming to get me, and for recording what happened. That was very quick thinking. Michael beamed at the praise, though his expression quickly turned to concern as he looked at Emma. Is she going to be okay? I'm taking her home for a hot bath and dry clothes right now, Sam assured him, rising to her feet and keeping an arm around Emma's shoulders. The festival will have to go on without us. Can I walk with you to your car? Michael asked earnestly. Dad says I should always make sure ladies get to their car safely. Despite the situation, Sam couldn't help a small smile at the boy's gallantry. That would be very gentlemanly of you, Michael. As they crossed the parking lot to Sam's Honda, Michael stopped suddenly. Oh, I almost forgot. Dad's picking me up early today for a dentist appointment. He'll want to know what happened to Emma. Sam hesitated, her protective instincts warring with her gratitude toward Michael. After a moment, she nodded. When your father arrives, you can tell him that Emma caught a chill and I've taken her home. If he has any questions, he has our address for tomorrow's playdate. What Sam didn't realize as she carefully settled a shivering Emma into the passenger seat was that Jackson Reed was already pulling into the school parking lot, and that the events set in motion that afternoon would accelerate the collision course between their separate worlds far faster than either of them had anticipated. Jackson Reed cut the engine of his F-150, scanning the school parking lot with practiced efficiency. He'd managed to reschedule Michael's dental appointment to arrive early for the festival, hoping to catch a glimpse of his son's class presentation before taking him to the dentist. The weather had turned nasty exactly as he'd predicted, and he found himself grateful that he'd tossed an extra jacket in the truck for Michael. His attention was drawn to a Honda Civic pulling out of a parking space near the edge of the lot. Through the windshield, he recognized Ms. Blackwood, behind the wheel, her expression tense. In the passenger seat sat a small figure wrapped in what appeared to be multiple layers of clothing. Her daughter, he presumed. Jackson frowned, glancing at his watch. The festival was scheduled to run for another 2 hours. Why would the teacher be leaving so early and looking so concerned? His question was answered moments later when Michael came sprinting across the parking lot, waving frantically to catch his attention. The camcorder Jackson had given him bounced against his hip as he ran. Dad, Michael called, yanking open the passenger door and climbing in. You're not gonna believe what happened. Slow down, buddy, Jackson said, noting his son's flushed face and excited demeanor. What's going on, and why do you have the camera? I got evidence, Michael declared, proudly holding up the camcorder. Ms. Wilson made Emma stand in the cold while everyone threw water at her. She got all wet and was shaking and everything. Jackson's expression darkened. What are you talking about? Who's Ms. Wilson? The mean fourth-grade teacher, Michael explained impatiently. She made Emma be the defender in this stupid water game, even though it's freezing outside. Emma got soaked, and then Ms. Blackwood came and stopped it, and there was a big argument. A cold feeling settled in Jackson's gut, a familiar sensation that had preceded violence many times in his past. He forced himself to remain calm for Michael's sake. Is Emma okay? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. I don't know, Miss Blackwood just took her home. She was shivering really bad. Michael's voice dropped. Dad, I think Ms. Wilson did it on purpose. She's always picking on Emma. Jackson stared through the windshield, watching Ms. Blackwood's car disappear down the street. Show me the video, he said quietly. Michael rewound the tape in the camcorder and flipped open the small display screen. See, I got it all. The tiny screen showed a shaky but clear image of Emma standing in a chalk circle, her red sweater already partially soaked as children took turns throwing wet sponges at her. Even in the small viewfinder, Jackson could see the girl shivering, her face set in a determined effort not to cry. The camera then panned to Ms. Wilson, smiling coldly as she supervised the game. Jackson felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel as he watched the scene unfold. Ms. Blackwood's intervention, the confrontation, the principal's arrival. When the recording ended, he sat in silence for a moment, tamping down the rage that threatened to boil over. "Dad?" Michael's voice was uncertain. "Are you mad?" Jackson forced his features to relax. "Not at you, son. You did exactly the right thing by recording this and going to get Ms. Blackwood." "Are we still going to the dentist?" Jackson checked his watch again. "No, I'm going to call and reschedule. Right now, I think we should drop by the store and pick up some soup. Or something for Emma. It sounds like she might be getting sick." Michael's face brightened. "Can we get her chicken noodle soup? That's what you always make me when I'm sick." "That's a good idea," Jackson agreed, starting the truck. "Maybe some orange juice, too." As they drove to the local market, Jackson's mind was racing. The cold, calculated cruelty he'd witnessed on that video stirred something dark inside him. A protective fury that extended beyond his own son to include Emma Blackwood. No child deserved to be treated that way, especially not by a teacher entrusted with their care. But there was something else nagging at him. Something about Ms. Wilson's deliberate targeting of Emma that seemed more than simple teacher-student bullying. It felt strategic, almost like she had a personal vendetta against the child or her mother. And if there was one thing Jackson Reed understood intimately, it was vendettas. The thermometer beeped, and Sam gently removed it from Emma's mouth, frowning at the display 101.3 degrees. She brushed damp hair from her daughter's forehead, noting the unnatural flush in her normally pale cheeks. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked, though the answer was obvious from Emma's glazed eyes and labored breathing. "Cold," Emma mumbled, pulling the blankets tighter around her small frame, despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "And my chest hurts when I breathe." Sam's concern deepened. She'd changed Emma into dry clothes immediately after getting home, given her a warm bath, and tucked her into bed with extra blankets. But instead of improving, Emma's condition had steadily worsened over the past few hours. What had started as shivering had progressed to a fever cough and now difficulty breathing. "I think we need to see a doctor," Sam decided, reaching for the phone on the bedside table. She dialed the local medical clinic, explaining the situation to the receptionist who answered. "I'm sorry, Ms. Blackwood, but Dr. Peterson is out of town at a conference," the woman explained. "The nearest open urgent care is in Helena, about an hour's drive. Would you like me to call ahead for you?" Sam glanced out the window at the snow that had begun falling, already coating the ground in white. Driving to Helena in this weather would be challenging at best, dangerous at worst. But Emma's labored breathing left her no choice. "Yes, please call ahead. Then we'll leave right away." After hanging up, Sam moved swiftly through the house, gathering essentials. Her purse, Emma's health insurance card, a change of clothes, and her emergency bag that never left the front closet. The weight of her service revolver, safely secured in its holster inside the bag, offered a small comfort. Old habits died hard, especially when your child was vulnerable. She had just finished bundling Emma in multiple layers when a knock sounded at the front door. Sam tensed her hand automatically, moving toward her bag before she forced herself to relax. No threat would announce themselves with a polite knock. Still, she approached the door, cautiously checking through the peephole before surprise replaced her wariness. Jackson Reed stood on her porch, one hand holding a grocery bag, the other resting on Michael's shoulder. Sam opened the door, the cold air immediately rushing into the warm house. "Mr. Reed, Michael, this isn't a good time, I'm afraid." Jackson took in her tense expression and the car keys clutched in her hand. Michael wanted to bring Emma some soup. He was worried about her after what happened. His eyes narrowed slightly as he noted Sam's obvious preparation for departure. "Is everything okay?" "Emma's running a high fever and having trouble breathing. I'm taking her to urgent care in Helena." Sam hesitated, then added, "The local doctor is out of town." Jackson's expression darkened. "In this weather, the roads will be dangerous, especially after dark." "I don't have much choice," Sam replied, her voice tight with controlled worry. "Her fever is over 101 and she's struggling to breathe. It could be pneumonia." Jackson was silent for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Let me drive you. My truck handles better in snow than your Honda would, and it has four-wheel drive. Sam blinked, caught off guard by the offer. Her instinct was to refuse, to handle this herself as she had handled every crisis since David's death. But a glance over her shoulder at Emma, pale and shivering on the couch, made her reconsider. That's very kind, but unnecessary. We'll be fine. Ms. Blackwood, Samantha. Jackson's tone softened slightly. I grew up in these mountains. Trust me when I say these roads get treacherous fast when the snow starts. Let me help. Something in his steady gaze, concern without pity, made Sam relent. All right, thank you. Dad, Michael tugged at his father's jacket. Can I come too? I want to make sure Emma's okay. Jackson hesitated, then nodded. You can come, but you'll need to be on your best behavior at the medical center. Within minutes, they had transferred Emma wrapped in blankets to Jackson's truck. Sam sat in the back seat with Emma's head cradled in her lap, while Michael rode up front with his father. Uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier excitement dampened by the seriousness of the situation. As Jackson navigated the increasingly snow-covered roads out of Riverdale, Sam found herself studying him in the rearview mirror. His hands were steady on the wheel, his focus absolute, his movements efficient and controlled. There was something about his demeanor that spoke of a man accustomed to crisis, not panicking, not overreacting, simply addressing the situation with calm competence. Michael showed me the video, Jackson said after several minutes of silence, his eyes meeting Sam's briefly in the mirror. Of what happened at the festival. Sam tensed. Did he? Yeah. Jackson's knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. That teacher, Wilson, she deliberately singled Emma out, didn't she? Sam stroked Emma's hair, considering her words carefully. It appears that way. Any idea why? The question was casual, but Sam detected the sharp intelligence behind it. Teachers sometimes have favorites and not so favorites, Sam replied neutrally. Jackson made a non-committal sound, unconvinced by her evasion. Michael says she's always picking on Emma. That doesn't sound like normal teacher behavior to me. No, Sam agreed quietly. It doesn't. They lapsed into silence again as Jackson turned onto the highway toward Helena, the windshield wipers working steadily against the falling snow. Emma stirred restlessly in Sam's lap, her breathing raspy and uncomfortable. Is she allergic to anything? Jackson asked suddenly. Medications, I mean. The question surprised Sam. No allergies. Why? Just thinking ahead. Jackson shrugged. Better to have that information ready when we get to the urgent care. Save time. Sam nodded again, struck by his practical approach. Most people would have filled the drive with reassurances or small talk to distract from the worry. Jackson Reed seemed to understand that neither would be welcome or useful. As they drove through the thickening snow, Sam found herself grateful for his steady presence, even as her trained instincts continued to whisper that there was more to this motorcycle shop owner than met the eye. For now, though, Emma's health took precedence over her suspicions. What neither adult realized was that the urgent care visit would be just the beginning of a night that would forever change their carefully separated lives. And that back in Riverdale, Patricia Wilson was already making a phone call that would set deadly events in motion. The Helena Urgent Care Center was a brightly lit oasis in the snowy darkness, its fluorescent interior a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. Emma lay on an examination table, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, as a physician assistant named Karen checked her vital signs and listened to her lungs with a stethoscope. Definite pneumonia in the lower right lung, Karen announced, removing the stethoscope from her ears. Her oxygen saturation is lower than I'd like to see, but not dangerously so. We'll start her on IV antibiotics and fluids, then switch to oral antibiotics once she stabilizes. Sam stood at the bedside, her face composed, but her eyes betraying her concern. How long will that take? The IV treatment needs to run for at least 4 hours, Karen explained, making notes in Emma's chart. Given the road conditions, I'd recommend staying in Helena overnight. There's a motel just down the street that many of our patients use. 4 hours, Sam glanced at her watch. Nearly 7 p.m. already. I'll get the IV started right away, Karen assured her, patting Emma's arm gently. She's going to be fine, Mom. Pneumonia is serious but treatable, especially when caught early like this. As the PA left to prepare the antibiotics, Sam sank into the chair beside the examination table, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb. Emma had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her breathing still labored but less desperate than before. A gentle knock on the door preceded Jackson's entrance, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee from the vending machine in the waiting room. He handed one to Sam, who accepted it with a grateful nod. Michael finally crashed on the waiting room couch, he said quietly, taking the seat across from her. He was determined to stay awake until he knew Emma was okay, but 8-year-old determination is no match for an hour-long Ranger Rick magazine in a warm waiting room. A small smile touched Sam's lips. Thank you for the coffee, and for everything else. Jackson shrugged, taking a sip from his own cup and grimacing at the bitter taste. How is she? Pneumonia, Sam replied, her eyes returning to Emma's sleeping form. They're starting IV antibiotics. They want us to stay overnight while the treatment runs. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. The motel down the street is basic but clean. Sarah, my late wife, stayed there during some of her treatments. A shadow crossed his face briefly before he continued. The roads back to Riverdale will be worse by now anyway. Staying is the right call. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the steady beep of Emma's monitor and the occasional voice from the hallway outside. Sam found herself studying Jackson openly now. The strong line of his jaw, partially hidden by his neatly trimmed beard, the faded scar above his right eyebrow, the way his large hands held the flimsy coffee cup with unexpected gentleness. You've done this before, she observed finally. Sat in hospital rooms, I mean. A look of old ennui crossed Jackson's features. Too many times. Sarah was sick for nearly 2 years before. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I'm sorry, Sam said simply. Michael mentioned she passed away when he was very young. Jackson nodded. Cancer, aggressive type. She was diagnosed when Michael was 3, gone by the time he turned 5. He rotated the coffee cup slowly between his palms. He doesn't remember her much. Sometimes that seems like a blessing. Other times it breaks my heart all over again. The raw honesty in his voice caught Sam off guard. This wasn't the calculated sharing of personal details to establish rapport that she'd been trained to recognize and sometimes employ during her FBI years. This was genuine grief, still sharp despite the passage of time. Emma doesn't remember much about her father either, Sam found herself saying. He died when she was 3. Car accident. The familiar lie felt suddenly hollow, especially in the face of Jackson's honesty. It's not easy, is it? Jackson's eyes met hers directly, raising them alone, being everything they need. No, Sam agreed softly. It's not easy. Karen returned with the IV supplies, efficiently setting up the antibiotics and connecting them to a port she established in Emma's arm. The girl stirred briefly but didn't fully wake, her body exhausted from fighting the infection. This will run for about 4 hours, Karen explained, adjusting the flow rate. I'll check back regularly, but the call button is right here if you need anything. She glanced at Jackson, then back to Sam with a questioning look. A friend, Sam explained simply. He drove us through the storm. After the PA left, Jackson stood stretching his tall frame. I should check on Michael, maybe see about getting rooms at that motel for later. Sam nodded, suddenly aware of how much she'd revealed and how comfortable she'd become in this man's presence. A warning bell chimed distantly in her mind. She was letting her guard down, perhaps because of the stress of Emma's illness, perhaps because of Jackson's unexpected kindness. Either way, it was dangerous. She still knew very little about him, despite the glimpse of genuine emotion he'd shown. Samantha, Jackson paused at the door, his expression unreadable. When this is over, when Emma's better, I think we should talk. The deliberate emphasis on talk sent a fresh wave of alertness through Sam. About what? About why a 4th-grade teacher would deliberately try to make your daughter sick. His eyes had hardened, the grief replaced by something colder and more calculating. Because that's what happened today. It wasn't an accident or poor judgment. It was deliberate. Sam straightened in her chair, her FBI training kicking in automatically. What makes you say that? The way she singled Emma out. The way she positioned the game so only Emma would get soaked. The fact that she insisted on outdoor water activities despite the weather warnings. Jackson's voice remained quiet but had taken on an edge. I know targeted harassment when I see it, Samantha. The question is, why would a teacher have it out for your daughter? Sam's mind raced. There was no way Jackson could know about her past, about Los Diablos, about Patricia's possible connection to them. Yet his instincts had led him to the same conclusion she'd reached, that Patricia Wilson's actions were deliberate and malicious. "I don't know," she said finally, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, we'll leave it at that for now." He glanced at Emma, his expression softening slightly. "Get some rest if you can. I'll handle the motel arrangements." After he left, Sam leaned back in her chair, tension coiled tightly in her muscles. Jackson Reed had just confirmed what she'd suspected from their first meeting. He was far more observant and intuitive than a simple motorcycle mechanic had any right to be. He'd recognized the calculated nature of Patricia's actions, immediately suggesting he was familiar with such tactics. The question was, what kind of man was so attuned to deliberate intimidation and targeted harassment? What kind of life had taught him to recognize those patterns so quickly? As Emma slept fitfully beside her, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important about Michael's father, something that might prove either invaluable or deadly in the days to come. The Snow Peak Motel hadn't changed much since the 1970s. Wood-paneled walls, floral bedspreads that had seen better days, and bathrooms with fixtures in colors no longer manufactured. But it was clean, warm, and only a 5-minute drive from the urgent care center where Emma was finally resting comfortably, her IV antibiotics completed, and her fever beginning to respond to treatment. Sam stood at the window of room 107, peering through a gap in the faded curtains at the snow still falling steadily in the parking lot. Jackson's truck was parked directly outside, covered in a fresh layer of white. He and Michael had taken the room next door, giving her and Emma privacy, while remaining close enough to help if needed. Emma stirred on the double bed, her cheeks less flushed than they had been earlier. The doctor had discharged her with oral antibiotics and strict instructions to rest, predicting a full recovery, provided she took it easy for the next week or so. The relief Sam had felt upon hearing that prognosis had been overwhelming, a reminder of how precious and precarious her life with Emma truly was. A soft knock at the door drew Sam's attention. She moved silently across the carpet, checking the peephole before opening the door to find Jackson standing there, his jacket dusted with snow. "Michael's finally asleep," he said by way of greeting. "Thought I'd check how Emma's doing." "Better," Sam replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Her fever's down and she's sleeping peacefully. The doctor says she should make a full recovery." Jackson nodded, remaining near the door as if uncertain of his welcome. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since this unexpected journey had begun. In the hospital, they'd had Emma's condition to focus on a practical concern that had bridged their natural caution around each other. Now in the quiet motel room with Emma sleeping soundly, there was nothing to distract from the unspoken questions hanging in the air. "I should let you rest," Jackson said, finally turning back toward the door. "Wait," the word escaped Sam before she could reconsider. "Would you like some coffee? The room has a small pot. It won't be good, but it will be hot." Something like surprise flickered across Jackson's face before he nodded. "Sure, thanks." Sam busied herself with the small coffee maker on the dresser, hyper-aware of Jackson taking a seat at the small table by the window. She'd spent years learning to read people, to assess threats, to maintain her cover under scrutiny. Yet something about this man threw her carefully honed skills into disarray. He wasn't behaving like someone with an agenda, yet every instinct told her he was more than he appeared. "You're very good in a crisis," she observed, measuring coffee grounds into the filter. "Very calm," Jackson shrugged. "Had plenty of practice." "In the Army," Sam ventured, turning to gauge his reaction. If he was surprised by her knowledge, he didn't show it. That and after, life hasn't exactly been uneventful. Sam handed him a steaming cup, then took the seat across from him, her own coffee untouched. "Thank you again for driving us, for helping with Emma. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Jackson's response was immediate and certain. It was the right thing to do. The simplicity of his answer, devoid of any expectation of gratitude or advantage, caught Sam off guard. In her years with the FBI, she'd learned that most people acted from self-interest, even when doing seemingly altruistic things. Genuine concern for a virtual stranger was rare. "Earlier at the hospital," Sam said carefully, "you said we should talk about why Ms. Wilson targeted Emma." Jackson's expression remained neutral as he sipped his coffee. "I did." "What makes you think she targeted her specifically?" "Because I watched the video Michael took. Twice." Jackson set his cup down, his eyes meeting hers directly. She deliberately called Emma forward, positioned her where she'd get the most soaked, and kept the game going longer than necessary. That wasn't random cruelty or bad judgment. That was calculated. Sam weighed her next words carefully. And you're familiar with calculated cruelty. A humorless smile touched Jackson's lips. You could say that. Because of your military background. Partly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new intensity. But I think you already have some theories about me, Ms. Blackwood, just as I have some about you. The challenge was clear, though his tone remained conversational. Sam felt her pulse quicken slightly, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with cover potentially being blown. She had two choices: continue the dance of half-truths and deflections, or take a calculated risk. Your posture, the way you scan rooms, the tattoos that most people wouldn't recognize. But I do. They tell a story, she said finally. You're not just a motorcycle mechanic, Mr. Reed. Jackson didn't flinch. And you're not just a third-grade teacher. Not with those situational awareness skills and the way you move. Efficient, always balanced, ready to react. That doesn't come from teaching multiplication tables. They regarded each other in silence for a long moment, a new understanding forming between them. I think, Jackson said slowly, that we both have reasons to be in Riverdale that go beyond what others know. And I think that whatever your reasons are, they've somehow put Emma in Patricia Wilson's crosshairs. The accuracy of his assessment sent a chill down Sam's spine. Before she could formulate a response, a buzzing sound came from Jackson's jacket pocket. He pulled out a cellular phone, a rare and expensive item in 1992, especially in rural Montana, and checked the display with a frown. "Excuse me," he said, standing and moving toward the door. "I need to take this." Sam watched him step outside the door, closing behind him, her mind racing. The phone confirmed her suspicions that Jackson Reed was more than a small-town business owner. Few people in Riverdale could afford such technology, and fewer still would receive calls at nearly midnight that required immediate attention. Through the thin walls, she could hear his muffled voice, the tone urgent but controlled. After several minutes, the door opened again, and Jackson returned, his expression grim. "We need to leave, now." Sam stood, immediately recognizing the command tone of someone used to being obeyed in emergencies. "What's happening?" "That was Ray, my assistant manager." Jackson moved to the window, peering out at the parking lot. "He just got word that there are people in Riverdale asking questions about you and Emma. Not locals. Men with tattoos and a Southern California accent." The blood drained from Sam's face. Los Diablos. The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she'd made a critical error. Jackson's head snapped around, his eyes locking onto hers with laser focus. "What did you just say?" His voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. Sam hesitated, her mind calculating escape routes, defensive options. If Jackson was somehow connected to Los Diablos. Los Diablos, she repeated, her body tensing for potential conflict. "A motorcycle gang from Southern California. They've been looking for me for 5 years. Jackson's expression shifted from surprise to something darker. "And why would a notorious drug-running motorcycle gang be looking for a school teacher?" The moment of truth had arrived. Sam drew herself up, decision made. "Because 5 years ago, I wasn't Samantha Blackwood, third-grade teacher. I was Special Agent Samantha Brennan, FBI Organized Crime Division. I led the operation that tried to take down the Los Diablos leadership and got my husband and 2 other agents killed in the process." The silence that followed Sam's revelation hung heavy in the motel room, broken only by Emma's soft breathing and the distant hum of the ancient heater. Jackson stood motionless, his face unreadable as he processed her words. "FBI," he repeated finally, his voice so low it was nearly a whisper. "You went after Los Diablos." Sam's hand drifted subtly toward her emergency bag where her service weapon waited. If Jackson had ties to Los Diablos, this confrontation could turn deadly in seconds. "Yes," she confirmed, watching him carefully. 5 years ago, we had an informant inside their organization. We were closing in on their leadership, building a RICO case that would have dismantled their entire operation. But something went wrong, Jackson said, his eyes never leaving hers. Sam swallowed hard, the painful memories surfacing, despite years of trying to bury them. The night of the raid, they were waiting for us. Someone had tipped them off. 3 agents died in the ambush, including my husband, David. I was only spared because her voice faltered momentarily, because he pushed me out of the line of fire, took the bullets meant for me. Jackson's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And Emma? She was 3, staying with my mother that night. After the funeral, the Bureau put us in witness protection. New identities, new life. I testified against the members we managed to arrest, but the leadership escaped. They've been looking for me ever since. The agent who could identify them and who knew their operations inside and out. And now they've found you in Riverdale, Jackson concluded grimly. Through Patricia Wilson. Sam nodded, still poised for any sudden movement from Jackson. She must be connected to them somehow. I heard her on the phone mentioning Los Diablos. That's why she's been targeting Emma. To get to me. Jackson turned away abruptly, pacing the small room with contained energy. When he faced her again, his expression had hardened into resolve. We need to move now. My truck can handle the snow, but we have to get out of here before they send people to check Helena. If they're smart, they'll cover the hospital and urgent care facilities first. The tactical assessment caught Sam off guard. She'd expected shock, disbelief, perhaps even fear at her revelation. Instead, Jackson was immediately focused on escape and evasion, the response of someone with experience in high-risk situations. "Why are you helping us?" she asked directly. "I just told you I'm a former FBI agent. Most people in Riverdale would consider that a pretty big deception." Jackson's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Let's just say I understand living with secrets, Samantha." He glanced at his watch. "We have maybe an hour before they expand their search beyond Riverdale. Can Emma travel?" Sam studied him for a long moment, making the most critical decision she'd faced since fleeing Los Angeles 5 years ago. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, she's sleeping now, but the antibiotics have stabilized her condition. The doctor said she needs rest, but didn't restrict travel." "Good. Get her ready. I'll wake Michael and check out. Meet me at the truck in 10 minutes. Jackson moved toward the door, then paused. "Samantha, is there anyone you can call for backup or extraction?" The question, specifically its wording, caught her attention. Extraction wasn't a term civilians typically used. "I have an emergency contact at the Bureau," she admitted. "But even if I called now, they wouldn't reach us before morning." Jackson nodded as if that confirmed something for him. "Then for tonight, it's just us. Pack only what you absolutely need." He slipped out the door without another sound. Sam stood motionless for a moment, processing what had just happened. Jackson Reed had taken her revelation about being an FBI in stride, too much stride for a regular civilian. He'd immediately switched to tactical planning, using terminology that suggested military or law enforcement background. And now he was risking his and his son's safety to help her and MO escape a dangerous motorcycle gang. Who exactly was Jackson Reed? The question would have to wait. She moved quickly to gather their belongings, keeping only the essentials: medications, identification documents, a change of clothes, and her weapon. As she gently woke Emma, explaining that they needed to leave, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a critical piece of information, something that would explain Jackson's composure and capability in this crisis. 10 minutes later, they were loading the truck, the falling snow providing cover in the darkened parking lot. Michael, still half asleep, didn't question why they were leaving in the middle of the night, simply climbing into the back seat and curling up next to Emma, who drifted back to sleep almost immediately. As Jackson pulled out of the motel parking lot, taking a side street to avoid the main road, Sam noticed his hands on the wheel. Steady, confident, making micro-adjustments for the snow without conscious thought. The hands of someone who had driven in dangerous conditions before, perhaps during pursuits or evasions. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, mindful of the sleeping children. Jackson kept his eyes on the road. "I have a cabin about 2 hours from here, deep in the mountains. No one knows about it except me and a couple of people I trust with my life." "Is it stock supplies food?" He nodded. "Enough for a couple of weeks if needed. Power generator, propane heat, secure perimeter." The description sounded less like a vacation property and more like a bug-out location, the kind of place someone would maintain if they expected to need a secure hideaway someday. "Jackson," Sam said carefully, "who are you really?" His eyes briefly met hers in the rearview mirror, calculating, measuring. Finally, he reached a decision. Let's get somewhere safe first, then we'll talk, honestly, both of us. The promise hung between them as the truck wound its way higher into the Montana mountains, leaving civilization behind and heading into the wilderness where both their secrets would finally come to light. The cabin was not what Sam had expected. Rather than a rustic hunting lodge or simple mountain retreat, the structure was a carefully designed compound nestled in a small valley invisible from the main road and accessible only by a narrow switchback trail that would be nearly impossible to navigate without four-wheel drive and local knowledge. As Jackson's truck approached, motion sensor lights illuminated the clearing, revealing a solid log structure with reinforced windows and multiple sight lines covering the approach. Sam's trained eye noted the defensive positioning immediately. Anyone attempting to reach the cabin would be visible long before they arrived with no cover for the final 100 yards. "This isn't just a vacation home," she observed as Jackson cut the engine. "No," he agreed simply. "It's not." They worked silently to transfer the still sleeping children inside. The cabin's interior was surprisingly comfortable. A large main room with a stone fireplace, a well-equipped kitchen, and 3 bedrooms branching off a central hallway. Most telling to Sam were the details others might miss. The reinforced door frames, the subtle positioning of furniture to provide cover, the emergency supplies organized with military precision. After settling Emma and Michael in one of the bedrooms, Sam returned to find Jackson building a fire, his movements efficient and practiced. He had already started a generator bringing warmth and light to the isolated structure. "Nice place," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Very defensible." Jackson looked up from the growing flames, his face partially shadowed. "That was the idea. Most motorcycle mechanics don't build compounds with tactical sight lines and reinforced entry points." A faint smile touched his lips. "No, they don't." He straightened, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Coffee. This conversation might take a while." Minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between them. The homey normalcy of the scene stood in stark contrast to the circumstances that had brought them there. "I served in Army Special Forces," Jackson began without preamble. 8 years, 2 tours. Honorable discharge in '85 after taking shrapnel in Afghanistan. One of those operations that officially never happened. Sam nodded. The military background explained much, but not everything. "After the Army, I came back to Montana, took over my father's motorcycle shop." Jackson paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "And his other responsibilities." "Which were?" Jackson's eyes met hers directly. "He was president of the Montana chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. When he stepped down due to health issues, I took over." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Sam's hand instinctively moved toward her concealed weapon before she caught herself. Hells Angels, one of the most notorious outlaw motorcycle clubs in the world, and traditional enemies of Los Diablos. "Your Hells Angels leadership," she said flatly. "Yes." Jackson made no move to close the distance between them, seeming to understand her need for space. "I've been president of the Montana chapter for 7 years now." Sam's mind raced, reassessing everything she knew about Jackson Reed through this new lens. The respect others showed him in town, the tattoos, the prosperity of his business despite Riverdale's small population, the tactical skills and vigilant awareness. "That's why you recognize the Los Diablos name," she realized. "Rival organization." Jackson's expression darkened. "More than rivals. There's been bad blood between the clubs for decades. Territorial disputes mostly. They've been trying to move into Montana for years, something I've been discouraging. So when I mentioned Los Diablos, I knew exactly who you were talking about and why they'd be dangerous to you and Emma." Jackson took a sip of his coffee. "What I don't understand is why Patricia Wilston would be connected to them. She doesn't fit the profile." Sam leaned back in her chair, the FBI analyst in her taking over despite her shock. "She could be family. Many of these organizations have strong family ties with women, often playing supporting roles rather than being patch-wearing members." Something flashed in Jackson's eyes. "You're good. That's exactly how it works." He nodded thoughtfully. "Family connection would explain her vendetta against you. If someone close to her was caught in your FBI operation or killed, Sam added grimly. They fell silent, the implications settling between them. Sam studied Jackson across the table, a man she'd been trained to view as a criminal, the president of an organization the FBI classified as an outlaw motorcycle gang involved in racketeering and organized crime. Yet this same man had risked everything to help her and Emma escape danger, had shown nothing but protectiveness toward their children. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Helping us. I was FBI. Your organization is on multiple federal watch lists." Jackson's expression softened as he glanced toward the hallway where their children slept. Michael and Emma. They're innocent in all this, and he hesitated. I made a promise to Sarah before she died, to be a better man than my father was, to use what power I have to protect, not just to control. The simple sincerity in his voice struck Sam more powerfully than any elaborately crafted explanation could have. The Montana Charter is different from some of the others, Jackson continued. Under my leadership, we've moved away from drug trafficking, focused more on legitimate businesses. We still operate in gray areas, protection, some loan operations, investments that banks won't touch. But we've drawn lines. Lines that Los Diablos doesn't respect, Sam surmised. Exactly, they're still deep in meth distribution, human trafficking, gun running, all things I've pushed to keep out of Montana. His jaw tightened. They're animals, Samantha, the kind that deserve to be put down. The vehemence in his voice wasn't just organizational rivalry, it was personal disgust. Sam recognized it because she'd felt the same during her years investigating them. We have a common enemy, she said slowly. More than that. Jackson leaned forward. We have children who need protection and skills that complement each other. Your FBI training my resources. Are you proposing an alliance, Mr. Reed? Despite everything, Sam found herself smiling slightly at the absurdity of their situation. I believe I am Agent Brennan. He returned the smile, though his eyes remained serious. At least until we deal with the immediate threat. Sam considered his offer, weighing years of law enforcement conditioning against the reality of their current predicament. Los Diablos had found her. They knew about Emma. Her FBI contacts were hours away at best. And here was Jackson Reed. Hell's Angels leadership, yes, but also a man who had demonstrated nothing but honor and protectiveness since she'd known him. Temporary alliance, she agreed, finally extending her hand across the table. Until Emma and Michael are safe. Jackson's hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused. Agreed. As they shook on their unlikely partnership, the first light of dawn began to filter through the cabin windows. Neither of them had slept, but both felt more alert than they had in hours, energized by purpose and the strange relief of finally dropping their masks. Get some rest if you can, Jackson said, releasing her hand. I'll take first watch and make some calls, discreetly. We need intelligence on who's in town and what they know. Sam nodded, tactical planning already taking over. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll need to formulate a strategy. She paused at the hallway entrance. And Jackson? Don't call me Agent Brennan again. That woman died 5 years ago. I'm Samantha Blackwood now, for Emma's sake. He understood immediately. Samantha it is. As she checked on Emma one last time before seeking her own rest, Sam reflected on the bizarre turn her life had taken. She'd spent years in hiding, constructing a careful existence designed to keep Emma safe. Now that existence had been shattered in a single day, yet somehow she felt more secure than she had in years. Because for the first time since David's death, she wasn't facing the danger alone. She had an ally, even if that ally was the last person her FBI self would ever have expected. Sam woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, her body instantly alert despite having slept less than 4 hours. Old habits from her field agent days allowed her to transition from sleep to full awareness in seconds, especially in unfamiliar surroundings. She checked her watch, 10:23 a.m. Jackson had let her sleep longer than the agreed 4 hours. After confirming Emma was still resting comfortably, her fever noticeably reduced, Sam followed the sounds of quiet conversation to the kitchen. There she found Jackson and Michael at the table, a map of Montana spread between them, as Jackson pointed out various locations, teaching his son about topography and navigation. Morning, Jackson said, looking up at her entry. His eyes held a question. How's Emma? She's still sleeping, but her fever's down. Sam reported, accepting the coffee mug he offered. The antibiotics seem to be working. Michael brightened at this news. Dad says we're having a special camping trip, but we have to stay inside because of Emma being sick. Sam met Jackson's eyes over the boy's head, understanding the fiction he'd created to explain their sudden relocation. That's right, very thoughtful of your dad to think of this place where Emma can rest. I made maps of the whole area, Michael said proudly, holding up a crude but enthusiastic drawing, so we know where everything is. That's excellent work, Sam praised, hiding her smile at the strategic value of keeping Michael occupied while also teaching him skills that might prove useful if the situation deteriorated. Why don't you go check on Emma, Jackson suggested to his son. Maybe read her one of those books we brought if she's awake. But remember to let her rest if she's tired. Once Michael had bounded down the hallway, Jackson's expression turned serious. I've made contact with my people in Riverdale. The news isn't good. Sam set down her coffee, bracing herself. Tell me. 6 men arrived yesterday evening, Southern California plates on their vehicles, staying at the Riverdale Inn. They've been asking questions about you and Emma, showing photographs. Jackson's voice hardened. They visited the school this morning, tried to get your personnel file from the office. Did they succeed? No, Principal Roberts refused without a warrant, but they know where you live. My guy watched them case your house around dawn. Sam processed this information with the detached analysis her FBI training had instilled. They'll realize we're not there. Then they'll start checking hospitals and motels in the surrounding area. Jackson nodded. Already happening. Ray spotted 2 of them at the Helena Urgent Care about an hour ago. They know Emma was treated there. Which means they'll find his motel next, Sam concluded. How much time do we have? Maybe 12 hours before they start expanding their search to more remote areas. Less if they're smart enough to check property records for my name. Jackson unfolded a larger map, this one marked with pencil notations. I've called in some of my most trusted men. They'll create a perimeter here, here, and here. He indicated positions on the access roads leading to the cabin. Early warning system, not engagement force. Sam studied the defensive positions with approval. Good choke points, limited approach options. Exactly. Meanwhile, I have people gathering intelligence on these Los Diablos members. Who they are, their patterns, weaknesses. The methodical approach impressed Sam. This wasn't the disorganized reaction of a criminal caught off guard. It was the calculated response of a tactical commander. What about Patricia Wilson? She asked. Jackson's expression darkened. That's the most interesting development. After the incident at the school yesterday, she disappeared. Didn't return to her rental house last night. Left most of her belongings behind. She was their advanced scout, Sam realized. Sent to confirm my identity before they moved in. That's my assessment too. Jackson tapped the map thoughtfully. Which means she's likely with them now, guiding their search. Sam's mind flashed to Emma shivering in the cold, soaked by water at Patricia's instruction. A calculated attempt to make her daughter ill, to create a scenario that would force them to seek medical attention and leave a trail. Cold, ruthless strategy that had nearly worked. What's your plan? She asked, pushing aside her anger to focus on the immediate threat. Jackson hesitated, studying her as if assessing how much to share. Originally get you and Emma to safety, then let my club handle the Los Diablos problem permanently. The implication was clear. Sam held his gaze steadily. And now I think we need to work together. Your FBI training gives you insights into their organization I don't have. My resources give us manpower and local knowledge they don't expect. He spread out another map, this one of Riverdale and the surrounding area. They think they're hunting a single mother and her daughter. They don't know about me or my connection to you. That's our advantage. Element of surprise. Sam agreed, professional appreciation overriding her misgivings about collaborating with a man who, under different circumstances, might have been an investigation target. I propose a 2-pronged approach. Defense and offense. Jackson outlined positions around the cabin perimeter. We maintain this position as our secure fallback, but we don't just wait for them to find us. We take the fight to them. Sam concluded, already seeing the strategy. Exactly. My men can isolate individual Los Diablos members, gather intelligence, create confusion in their ranks. Meanwhile, you and I prepare a more definitive solution. The deliberate vagueness of definitive solution hung between them. 5 years ago, Sam would have immediately clarified that any operation needed to end with the arrests and due process. Now, with Emma's safety at stake and no official backup coming, her priorities had shifted. "I want Patricia Wilson," she said quietly, the steel in her voice unmistakable. Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The teacher is yours." They spent the next hour developing their strategy, marking maps, timing movements, identifying vulnerabilities. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Sam found herself impressed by Jackson's tactical thinking. He'd clearly retained and built upon his military training, adapting it to the more fluid world of motorcycle club conflicts. "There's one more thing you should know," Jackson said as they finalized their plans. "About Patricia Wilson." Sam looked up, noting the grim set of his mouth. "My sources did some digging into her background. Her real name is Patricia Vasquez. She's the younger sister of Diego Vasquez, also known as El Cuchillo." The blood drained from Sam's face. "El Cuchillo, the knife." She sank into a chair. "Los Diablos leader, the one who got away in our raid." Jackson watched her reaction carefully. "You know him?" "He's the man who killed my husband," Sam said, her voice flat with old pain. "I saw him do it. That's why they want me so badly. I'm the only witness who can positively identify him for the murder of a federal agent." Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "So this isn't just about silencing a witness. It's personal vengeance. Patricia is hunting you for her brother." "5 years," Sam whispered. "5 years, they've been looking for us." "Well, they found you," Jackson said, his voice hardening. "But they also found me. And unlike you, I don't have a badge limiting what I can do to protect what's mine." The fierce protectiveness in his declaration should have alarmed Sam. Instead, she found it oddly comforting, a reminder that for all his criminal connections, Jackson Reed was fundamentally a protector, not a predator. "So we have a plan," she said, straightening her shoulders and pushing aside the painful memories. "When do we start?" Jackson checked his watch. "My men will be in position by nightfall. We move at dawn tomorrow." "And the children?" "I have arrangements in place. If things go sideways, my most trusted lieutenant has instructions to evacuate them to a secure location out of state. Someone I would trust with Michael's life, which means you can trust them with Emma's." The depth of planning impressed Sam. Jackson had considered contingencies she hadn't even voiced yet. "Thank you," she said simply. He met her eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. "They messed with our kids, Samantha. That's a line you don't cross." As they sealed their alliance with that shared principle, neither of them fully recognized how profoundly their worlds had already merged, or that the bond forming between them went beyond their tactical partnership to something deeper and more enduring. In the bedroom down the hall, Emma's fever finally broke completely, her breathing easy and natural for the first time since the school incident. And beside her bed, Michael Reed sat reading aloud from a battered copy of The Hobbit, determined to keep his friend company as their parents prepared for battle. Patricia Vasquez stared out the window of room 114 at the Riverdale Inn, watching snow fall in the weak morning light. Behind her, 6 men cleaned weapons, studied maps, and waited for orders. They were hardened members of Los Diablos, selected specifically for their loyalty and brutality, qualities her brother valued above all else. "The motel in Helena confirmed they stayed there last night," reported Mateo, her brother's second-in-command. "But they checked out suddenly around midnight. No indication where they went." Patricia turned from the window, her elegant features sharp with frustration. "They know we're here. Someone warned them." "The school teacher has no connections here," Mateo argued. "No one to warn her. Then she made us some other way." Patricia paced the small room, her designer boots incongruous against the cheap carpet. "I was careful. I spent weeks establishing my cover, getting close to her, confirming her identity." "Maybe too careful," suggested Raul, a heavily tattooed enforcer cleaning a .45 automatic on the bed. "Should have just grabbed the kid when you had the chance. Used her as bait." Patricia shot him a venomous look. "My brother gave specific instructions. Confirmation first, then a clean operation. No mistakes, no witnesses." Her voice hardened. "This woman testified against our family, put our cousins in federal prison for life. Diego wants her handled properly." "Well, she's in the wind now," Mateo said pragmatically, "along with the kid, and this weather isn't helping our search." Patricia stopped pacing, her mind working through possibilities. She has pneumonia, she said suddenly. The girl. That's why they went to Helena for medical treatment. So, so she needs medication, antibiotics, and she needs to stay warm. Patricia's eyes gleamed with cold calculation. They can't be camping in this weather with a sick child. They need shelter infrastructure. Mateo straightened, following her logic. A friend's house. Someone local who's helping them. Exactly. But who? Patricia mentally reviewed everything she'd learned about Samantha Blackwood during her weeks of surveillance. She's kept to herself since moving here. No close friends, no romantic relationships. She paused as a memory surfaced. Except she seemed friendly with that motorcycle mechanic. Reed, his boyish friends with her daughter. Reed, Mateo's expression changed, sudden wariness in his eyes. Jackson Reed. Patricia turned to him sharply. You know him. Mateo and Raul exchanged glances. If it's who I think it is, Mateo said carefully, he's not just a mechanic. He's Hell's Angels, Montana chapter president. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Patricia stared at them in disbelief. Hell's Angels here in this backwater. Montana chapter's been around for decades, Raul confirmed. They've kept us out of the state for years. Reed's supposed to be the reason why. Ex-military, strategic, ruthless, when crossed. Patricia processed this information, recalibrating her assessment of the situation. And his son is friends with the FBI agent's daughter. That can't be coincidence. If Reed is helping them, Mateo warned, this just got a lot more complicated. He'll have resources, men's safe houses. For the first time since arriving in Riverdale, Patricia felt a flutter of uncertainty. Her careful plan had assumed a lone woman with a child, vulnerable and isolated. If Hell's Angels were involved, particularly their leadership, she straightened her shoulders, refusing to show weakness in front of her brother's men. Call Diego. He needs to know what we're dealing with. As Mateo stepped outside to make the call, Patricia returned to the window, her mind racing. An FBI agent and a Hell's Angels president allied against Los Diablos. The bizarre partnership would have been amusing if it weren't so dangerous to her mission. But Patricia had not survived as Diego's most trusted operative by buckling under pressure. If anything, this new complication made the hunt more interesting. And when they finally cornered Samantha Blackwood, her death would be that much sweeter for the challenge she'd presented. Beyond the motel window, the Montana winter raged on, oblivious to the deadly confrontation brewing within its snowy embrace. The abandoned lumber mill stood like a skeletal giant against the twilight sky, its rusted equipment in weathered buildings, a monument to Riverdale's more prosperous past. Located 3 miles outside town, it offered isolation, multiple approach vectors, and most importantly, neutral territory. A setting where neither Los Diablos nor Hell's Angels would have home field advantage. Jackson Reed surveyed the location through binoculars from his position in the tree line, noting entry points and potential ambush locations. Beside him, Samantha checked her weapon, the FBI-issued Glock she'd kept meticulously maintained through 5 years of exile. Your men are in position, she asked quietly. Jackson nodded. Perimeter established. Comms check complete. No one approaches without us knowing. The plan had come together with surprising efficiency over the past 24 hours. Jackson's intelligence network had intercepted a call from Los Diablos up to their California headquarters, confirming Patricia's identity and revealing their growing frustration at failing to locate their targets. Most importantly, they'd learned that Diego El Cuchillo Vasquez himself was en route to Montana, a development that had shifted their strategy from defensive to offensive. If the snake is coming out of his hole, Jackson had reasoned, we set the terms of engagement. The carefully crafted message delivered to the Riverdale Inn that morning had been simple. Samantha Blackwood would meet with Patricia Vasquez alone at the old lumber mill to discuss terms. No FBI involvement, no backup. Just 2 women resolving a personal vendetta. It was, of course, a trap, but one designed to be irresistible to people driven by arrogance and vengeance. They're coming, Jackson said, lowering the binoculars as headlights appeared on the access road. 2 vehicles. Right on schedule. Sam felt a cold calm settle over her, the familiar detachment that had served her through countless high-risk operations. Remember, Patricia is mine. I need her alive long enough to confirm Diego's involvement in David's murder. Jackson's expression hardened. And after that, Sam said evenly, Justice takes whatever form necessary. The SUVs parked in the mill's central yard, disgorging seven figures into the fading light. Sam recognized Patricia immediately, her elegant posture distinctive even at distance. The others were typical Los Diablos soldiers, heavily tattooed armed, moving with the cocky swagger of men who relied on intimidation. They brought more men than agreed, Jackson observed without surprise. Of course they did. Sam checked her watch. Give me 3 minutes to get in position, then initiate the distraction. Jackson caught her arm as she prepared to move. Samantha. His voice had softened, the tactical commander momentarily replaced by something more personal. Be careful. Emma needs you to come back. The genuine concern in his eyes caught her off guard. After a moment's hesitation, she covered his hand with her own. I will. Michael needs you too. Then she was gone, slipping through the shadows toward the main mill building, where Patricia and her men were now conducting a preliminary sweep. Jackson watched her disappear, a shadow among shadows, before raising his radio. All units stand by. Operation begins in 3 minutes. Inside the cavernous main building, Sam moved with practiced stealth among rusted machinery and collapsed walkways. Years of training allowed her to step silently, to use ambient sounds, to mask her movement, to become nearly invisible in the gathering darkness. She positioned herself on a partially collapsed mezzanine with clear sight lines to the open area below, where Patricia stood issuing orders to her men. Search everything, the woman commanded, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. She's here somewhere. Find her, but remember, Diego wants her alive when he arrives. Sam counted 6 men spreading out through the building, plus Patricia. More than expected, but not enough to change the plan. She glanced at her watch, 30 seconds remaining. Precisely on the schedule, the first explosion rocked the northern edge of the property, a controlled detonation designed to create chaos rather than casualties. Shouts of alarm erupted below as a second explosion followed, then a third, forming a perimeter of fire and noise that disrupted all communication. In the confusion, Sam made her move. Dropping silently to the ground level, she circled behind a massive lumber saw, waiting as Patricia barked orders into a radio, dispatching men to investigate the explosions. It's a trap, you idiots, Patricia was shouting, her composure finally cracking. Get back here now. Hello, Patricia, Sam said quietly, stepping into view with her weapon trained steadily on the other woman. Or should I call you Ms. Vasquez? Patricia froze, then slowly turned her hand, drifting toward her handbag. Don't, Sam warned. You wouldn't get halfway there. Outside, gunfire erupted, short, controlled bursts rather than panicked spraying. Jackson's men engaging the Los Diablos soldiers who had been drawn out by the explosions. You're alone, Sam observed calmly. Your brother's men abandoned you to save themselves. Typical Los Diablos loyalty. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Patricia's face before her features hardened into hatred. You've been running for 5 years, Agent Brennan. 5 years while my brother built an empire. Did you really think a school teacher and a few local bikers could stop what's coming? I'm not trying to stop an empire, Sam replied evenly. I'm here for justice, for my husband and the other agents your brother murdered. Patricia laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the metal walls. Justice. There's no justice in this world, only power. Diego has it, you don't. That's where you're wrong. Sam stepped closer, keeping her weapon steady. I have the truth. I saw Diego execute federal agents in cold blood. My testimony puts him away forever. Your testimony, Patricia's smile was venomous. You'll never live to testify. Even if you kill me, Diego has resources you can't imagine. He'll never stop hunting you or your precious daughter. The mention of Emma sent a cold wave of fury through Sam, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Why help him? You had a life education. You could have been anything. Instead, you chose to become his attack dog. Something vulnerable flashed across Patricia's face. So briefly, Sam almost missed it. You know nothing about family loyalty, about blood debts. Diego raised me after our parents were killed. Everything I am, I owe to him. And that justifies targeting an innocent child, making Emma sick as part of your sick game. Sam's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed. You crossed a line, Patricia, one you can't come back from. For a moment, uncertainty seemed to flicker in Patricia's expression. Then her hand moved, a quick, desperate lunge toward her bag. Sam reacted instantly, closing the distance between them in 2 strides and striking with practiced precision. The blow connected solidly, sending Patricia sprawling across the concrete floor, her bag skidding away. Sam kicked the purse aside, keeping her weapon trained on the fallen woman. That was stupid. Patricia glared up at her, blood trickling from her lip. You think this ends with me? Diego is already on his way. By tomorrow, he'll be here with enough men to burn this entire town to the ground if necessary. I'm counting on it, Sam replied coldly. In fact, I've been waiting 5 years for the chance to face him again. Understanding dawned in Patricia's eyes. This isn't just about capturing me. You're using me as bait. The same way you used my daughter. Sam's voice was ice. Except Emma was innocent. You're not. Before Patricia could respond, the main doors burst open and Jackson entered, flanked by 2 of his men. His expression was grim, blood spattering his jacket, though whether his or someone else's, Sam couldn't tell. Perimeter secured, he reported tersely. 4 hostiles down, 2 captured. Building is clear. Patricia's eyes widened as she recognized him. Reed, you're working with an FBI agent. Have you lost your mind? Do you know what the other chapters will do when they hear about this? Jackson regarded her with cold contempt. I know exactly what I'm doing, protecting my territory from garbage like Los Diablos. He turned to Sam. We have a problem. Diego Vasquez isn't coming tomorrow. According to our captives, he's already here. Arrived this afternoon by private plane. He's waiting at the motel for confirmation of your capture. The news altered their timeline, but not their fundamental strategy. Sam nodded, decision made. Then we finish this tonight. What are you going to do with me? Patricia asked, fear finally breaking through her composed facade. Sam looked down at the woman who had threatened her daughter, who had facilitated the murder of her husband, who had shattered the peace she'd fought so hard to build. That depends, she said quietly, on how cooperative you're willing to be. As Jackson's men secured Patricia, Sam stepped aside with Jackson to recalibrate their plan. The final confrontation with Diego Vasquez, the man who had haunted her nightmares for 5 years, was now just hours away. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange calm. Because this time she wasn't facing him as an isolated FBI agent caught in an ambush. This time she had allies. She had Jackson Reed and his men, unlikely partners forged in the fire of shared danger and mutual respect. Most importantly, she had something to fight for beyond mere survival or abstract justice. She had Emma in the promise of a future where her daughter could grow up without looking over her shoulder. Are you ready for this? Jackson asked quietly, studying her face. Sam checked her weapon one final time, her eyes clear and determined. I've been ready for 5 years. Outside the abandoned mill, the Montana night settled over the landscape, snow beginning to fall again in gentle flakes that would soon cover the evidence of violence. Within hours, the final chapter of a 5-year vendetta would be written, one way or another. The confrontation with Diego Vasquez at the Riverdale Inn ended in a swift, brutal efficiency that surprised even Sam. Jackson's men had sealed all exits while Sam and Jackson themselves entered through the service entrance, using Patricia as both shield and bait. When Diego saw his sister with a gun to her head, his legendary composure fractured just enough. You should have stayed in California, Jackson told him coldly, as Hell's Angels members materialized from the shadows surrounding the Los Diablos leader and his remaining guards. What happened next occurred in flashes of controlled violence. Diego lunging for his weapon, Sam's finger tightening on her trigger, the spray of crimson against faded motel wallpaper. In 20 seconds, it was over. The man who had murdered her husband, who had haunted her nightmares for 5 years, lay motionless on cheap carpeting, his eyes fixed on nothing. Patricia's anguished scream echoed through the room. You promised to take me in alive. I promised to let you live if you cooperated. Sam corrected her, holstering her weapon. I never promised the same for your brother. The FBI arrived 6 hours later, alerted by Sam's emergency contact. By then, Jackson's men had disappeared like smoke, leaving behind only the Los Diablos casualties, and a trembling Patricia in zip ties. Sam gave her statement, a carefully edited version that omitted Jackson's involvement beyond a local business owner who helped me escape. 3 weeks later, on a crisp December morning, Sam stood on the porch of her small house, watching Emma build a snowman with Michael in the front yard. Her pneumonia had fully resolved, leaving no lasting effects except perhaps a deeper appreciation for warm sweaters and hot chocolate. The children's laughter floated through the clear Montana air, untainted by fear or threat. "Penny, for your thoughts," Jackson asked, joining her on the porch with two steaming mugs. "Just thinking about the future," Sam replied, accepting the coffee. "The Bureau offered to relocate us again. New identities, new town." Jackson studied her profile, his expression unreadable. And I told them no. She turned to face him. "Emma needs stability. She's happy here. She has friends." Her eyes lingered meaningfully on Michael. A rare, genuine smile crossed Jackson's weathered face. "Riverdale's grown on me, too. Might even be worth dealing with the paperwork nightmare this caused with some of the other chapters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the snow. The unlikely alliance between FBI agent and outlaw motorcycle president had evolved into something neither had anticipated. A bond forged in shared danger and mutual respect, with potential for more. "You know," Sam said finally, "Emma's been asking if Michael and his dad can join us for Christmas dinner." Jackson's hand found hers on the porch railing, warm and solid. "I think we'd like that." As snow began to fall again in gentle flakes, Sam realized that for the first time in 5 years, she was no longer looking over her shoulder. The shadows that had pursued her and Emma for so long had finally been banished, not by running, but by standing her ground alongside the most unexpected of allies. Sometimes, she reflected, safety came from the places you least expected to find it.